Rhaegar Targaryen's a very interesting character. In a lot of ways, I think he's very similar to Griffith. I think Mira and Martin were trying to kind of do a similar thing with it. So let's just kind of go through a couple parallels before we get into Rhaegar, just to kind of give you an overview of my thoughts on the matter. So, first up, they're both obviously really, really good looking and have white hair. Now, this is kind of important because, once again, they're both set in kind of a medieval setting. And both Griffith and Rhaegar are kind of the stereotypical knight in shining armor. They look like they just rode out of a storybook, there to save the day. They project this era of grace and chivalry and intellect and all these other things. They look like a hero and they act like a hero. Also, in both cases, pretty much everybody sings their praises. All the characters you like. In one hand, you have like Barristan Selmy and Jorah Mormont, who say Rhaegar's like the greatest dude who ever lived. And the other one, obviously, you have Guts and Casca, who you both like as a viewer, who say Griffith is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And the people who dislike them are people you dislike. Like, one of the things that always amuses me is how there was that, like, evil royal conspiracy to try to kill Griffith because they thought he was gaining too much power. And you as a viewer hate them because they're going against your hero, but they were actually right because he turned out to be the Antichrist. And the same thing with Rhaegar. Who hates Rhaegar more than anyone else? Robert, the drunken, lecherous buffoon. We see Robert at his worst, and we're presented with Rhaegar at his best. And just the whole tale of Rhaegar, it comes across very much as your stereotypical fantasy tale. The gallant knight fighting to save his kingdom against the monstrous Robert Baratheon. He was forced into a loveless marriage and ran off with the girl of his dreams, who was engaged to marry said horned demon. The fact that he played a harp, was mysterious, and was seemingly good at everything also kind of helps matters. Same thing kind of with Griffith. He has his dream, the dream to make this super kingdom, and like the thing about, once again, with Griffith's dream is we have no idea what his actual dream is. He never says, in my kingdom, it's going to be good for everybody. It's going to be equal. The poor man's going to get a better deal. He just wants a kingdom. And it's kind of a thing with Rhaegar as well. It's very easy to kind of just look at the tropes, the context, what he looks like, what people say about him, but not actually look at the man himself. Because Rhaegar was a really weird dude, and in my view was probably crazy. So there's been debate over what, if any, mental illness Rhaegar had. He 100% had bipolar disorder. I don't think there's really any real question here. The fact that he would go through long depressive phases, and Barristan says, I don't think it was in Rhaegar to be happy. And he'd like go away in his favorite place in the world was Summerhall, where like the Targaryen dynasty basically collapsed. Like most of the remainder of the dynasty died out. Like the fact that that was his favorite place in the world is disturbing. And I remember they say as a child he took absolutely no joy in or interest in the play of other children. That's not a bipolar thing per se, but like Rhaegar wasn't just nerdy, he wasn't just bookish, he wasn't just shy. He was literally had no interest in other people growing up. Like, once again, that's really weird. I don't know if that's necessarily a bipolar thing. Probably the depressive aspect of it is. And I know for personal experience, the deep personality issues that comes from having these two competing forces within you can lead to you being very detached from reality. So, I mean, the depressive part of Rhaegar, I think, is pretty obvious. The manic part, though, is something we have to take a minute and consider. What is Rhaegar kind of known for? Making sudden, impulsive, megalomaniacal decisions that tended to turn out really poorly that he didn't really think through. Like, most of the stuff he did that was insane seems to have been done when he was on a manic phase. And as someone who's bipolar, I know you can just have a manic phase or you can just have a sudden change in your personality and then you just do something completely different, or the way you look at something has completely changed and you'll kind of never go back to the way you looked at it before. Like with Rhaegar, one day he just found in a book something important, and then he said, I need armor and a sword," and then he just decided to become a warrior. And it's like that's kind of like a really bipolar thing to do, like just this change on the dime because he read something about a prophecy and he thought the prophecy applied to him, and that he had to like be the one to fulfill it. Like that's pretty magical, kind of manic, megalomaniacal thinking, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, these impulsive things only got worse throughout his life to the point where he literally started a civil war that got tens of thousands of people killed because of a flight of fancy. So let's kind of look at some other aspects of Rhaegar and just kind of see like what kind of dude this guy was. So, so far we have a guy who had no interest in other people whatsoever, which is weird. Whose favorite place in the world was where his family died. Oh, another bipolar thing is his bursts of creativity, where he would make completely new songs kind of up on the spot. That's another very bipolar thing. Particularly, he'd have it after a depressive phase where he went to Summerhall. And then let's kind of like talk a bit about his marriage to Elia. I feel really bad about for Elia. By all accounts, she was a nice girl. I don't think she was a great beauty like Dany or Sansa, but she was described as being pretty, very kind, very gentle. She sounds like a nice girl, and she was, from everything we can determine, a very dutiful wife. She did bear Rhaegar 2 children. If Aegon the Sixth is to be believed, he turned out remarkably well, and she performed her duties as well as can be expected for the wife of the crown prince. Now, obviously, kind of the way where things started to kind of go off the rails was when Tywin and him were kind of coming up with their plan to get rid of Aerys, and this kind of had several different phases. There was the defiance at Duskendale, where it looked like Tywin was trying to get Aerys killed so that Rhaegar would become king. And when they threatened to kill Aerys, he said, "We have a better king right here." Tywin was constantly trying to undermine Aerys because Aerys had screwed around with Johanna, who's the only person Tywin ever really gave a shit about. He knew Tywin was going to come to kill him at some point, and he knew that Rhaegar was in on it. Now, the Order of the Green Hand in one of their videos suggests that Aerys' obsession with having a second heir maybe came from him thinking Rhaegar was crazy. Which, given how crazy Aerys was, I think says something. Then again, the realm didn't really bleed until Rhaegar started Robert's Rebellion. Now, granted, Aerys made the whole thing a lot worse by executing Brandon and Rickard. But to be semi-fair, if you showed up at the White House and with a group of armed men and started yelling for the head of Ivanka Trump, I don't think that the Secret Service would react very well to that. But yeah, he was definitely trying to overthrow him, and that was like the whole point of the tourney at Harrenhal, where it was like, okay, Rhaegar's going to come there, he's going to be the dashing prince, everyone's going to love him, Aerys is going to show up, he's going to look absolutely insane, everyone's going to agree to overthrow it. It's like Tywin's master plan, he's like sitting in the back, stroking his, I don't know, maybe he has a lion cub or something that he strokes. He's like, excellent, things are going to plan. And then, like, can you imagine what the conversation would be like afterwards? Tywin, yeah, so the tournament's over. How did it go? Well, Rhaegar won. He looked really dashing in his red armor. Aerys had fingernails longer than his arms, and he looked really crazy, and people really cheered for Rhaegar. Excellent. Excellent. All my plans are coming to fulfillment. My lord, there's something else. What? He won the tournament. That's good. That's good. That makes it even better. The thing is, though, he didn't crown his wife. He crowned Lyanna Stark. What? Yeah, he rode right past her and she was very pregnant. That'll be all, you're dismissed. I think that's probably how that conversation would have gone. Like, he blew it. Like, the best chance they had to get rid of Ares, he blew it because he impulsively did something really stupid. And I mean, some people have tried to defend Rhaegar and said, "Oh, she's Dornish, she's okay with paramours," and we don't know if that's like as widespread as people say it is. We don't know if Aaliyah was like that. She seems like a nice girl. I don't know. She might have been okay with Rhaegar having a girl on the side. I who knows. I know what's not okay, though, is being public about it. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, for rulers, for princes or kings or high lords to have mistresses. But it's still technically immoral, and it's still technically frowned upon. Like, it's one thing to have a mistress, it's another for it to be, like, in public. That's a very different thing. Generally speaking, rulers, if they cared all about their reputation, have tried to do this sort of thing in secret. And even if it's an open secret, people tend to look the other way. But to, like, publicly humiliate his pregnant wife, to, like, just ride past her and just leave her sitting there, like, crying, I don't know. That's really cold. And once again, that's kind of like a bipolar manic thing to do. He just kind of developed this immediate infatuation with Lyanna, and then obviously he ran off with her, and he didn't leave a note behind. He didn't say, Lyanna didn't write a note and say, like, yeah, I'm running off with Rhaegar because I think Robert's an asshole. Like, as people have pointed out, Robert thinks that Rhaegar kidnapped her and was raping her. And Ned doesn't correct him. And, like, the whole realm, like, what do people think happened? Like, do people think it was, like, some romantic getaway? Do they think that he kidnapped Lyanna and raped her? Like, no one really knows. And Rhaegar isn't really remembered as being some sort of, like, great villain. He's not remembered as being an evil man, really, despite the fact that his actions led the realm to ruin. I find either people like Ned remember him in a very kind of mild way, and other people actually like him. And Robert's kind of portrayed as being a buffoon for being so, like, hating on Rhaegar when everyone else likes him. So, like, how does this all relate to Griffith? Once again, you as the viewer are kind of taken in by this dude. Like, everybody loves him. He looks like a hero. He has, like, this tragic romantic love story between him and Lyanna. But, like, you have to look at what the guy actually did and kind of read between the lines of what people literally say about him. Like, Barristan Selmy, God's bless him, was trying really, really hard to make Rhaegar seem good, but he kind of came across as a psycho in all of his stories. It's like with Griffith, if you start going back and looking at some of the stuff he did, you're like, this guy was kind of checked out. And same thing is, like, you actually look at how Rhaegar behaves. And, like, getting back to kind of, like, the whole bipolar thing, like, some people defend him and say, oh, he was fulfilling a prophecy. And it's like, okay, well, which prophecy? Was it the prince that was promised? Was it the dragon must have 3 heads? Like, what prophecy? Because theoretically, he fulfilled it, because he said, when Aegon the Sixth was born, he said, he is the prince who is promised, and his is the song of ice and fire. And then he came up with the dragon must have 3 heads, and you're like, why couldn't he be one of the 3 heads, or his brother, or I guess Dany when she was born? Like, it's just that. And then I guess kind of the other thing people make fun of is they had to literally drag him back to the capital. He was playing house with Lyanna, supposedly, out in the middle of nowhere, while the realm burned because of his retarded decision. And when he comes back, he just goes to Jaime and he's like, look after my wife. When I get back, changes will be made. And it's like he's coming back. Like, he's not scared to fight Robert Baratheon, who'd won all but one battle, who's like 6'7", immensely strong and has a giant warhammer. And he has like all these badasses following him, like Ned Stark and the Blackfish and the Errands, and like he has all these badasses following him, and it's like, don't worry guys, I'm gonna come back. Nothing bad could possibly happen. But then everything bad did happen, and it was the final downfall of his dynasty. The dynasty that had survived, what was it, like 4 or 5 Blackfire rebellions, one, like a massive civil war, a series of like horrifically incompetent kings like Aegon I think it's Aegon the Fourth, the Unworthy. Aegon the Fourth, everything else they had survived. Actually, there's 2 civil wars, because there's the civil war against Maegor, which actually had several phases, and a lot of House Targaryen died during that. But ultimately, what it brought it down was Rhaegar. He was the one that made them lose the throne. After 300 years, after, like I said, at least 2 civil wars, 4 or 5 Blackfire rebellions, countless intrigue, the Faith and the Maesters trying to dethrone them, it was Rhaegar in the end. And yet, we as the viewer are supposed to love him. And that's how everybody reacts to it. Everyone thinks he's the greatest guy ever. But nothing about him really adds up, and nothing about him really fits with this image that we get of him. And I think that's on purpose, and I think that's partially why George is such a good writer. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Rhaegar Targaryen. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Argent, and I'll talk to you guys later.